Thank you, Christopher. Chairman Cahill, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be here. Always nice to be in Charleston, and it's an honor to be at this Preservation Society event. Congratulations on almost 100 years of advocacy on behalf of one of the world's great cities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your city tonight and where it's going and where it fits into some of the other things going on around the country and so forth. But I'd like to start off with a little story about how I got interested in what I do. I've been involved in preservation, urban design, community planning, land use for almost 40 years now. And it goes back a really long way. Actually, I was started off during the Vietnam War when I was a young second lieutenant. I had just finished field artillery school and jungle warfare training, and I had orders to a small fire base in the central highlands of Vietnam where I was supposed to be a forward observer. And about a week before I'm supposed to fly off to Saigon, I get a call from the Pentagon, and I have a colonel on the other end of the line, and he's with the personnel division at the Pentagon. He says to me, "Lieutenant McMahon, would you have any interest in being reassigned to Europe?" About 2 seconds, and I said, "Yes, Europe sounds extremely exciting." And I was one of the lucky few. I was sent to Heidelberg, West Germany, which was then the headquarters for the U.S. military in Europe. I was assigned as an aide to a United States general. And then I spent the next 2.5 years of my life flying all over Europe in a helicopter. And that experience completely and totally changed my life. I didn't realize how much it would change my life until I flew home to Birmingham, Alabama, where I grew up, and I got out of the airplane and drove home. And for the first time ever, I saw the American landscape with a completely different set of eyes. Because, ladies and gentlemen, to travel is to learn. And that's what we try to do at the Urban Land Institute, is to learn what's working, what's not working, what might work better in land use and development. I'm going to share with you tonight some of the things that I've learned in this field over the last few years. So let's start off with your city. I think this is a very special place. I know you agree with that. This is one of the world's, I think, great cities. It's a place of great history, great resources, great people, and great beauty. But the truth is, there is no place in the world today that will stay special by accident. And the reason for that is, of course, because the world is changing faster than ever. Now, I understand there's a lot of people in this room and elsewhere that don't like change. But I want to tell you something. There's only two kinds of change in the world we live in today. There is planned change and there is unplanned change. I mean, you can grow by choice or you can grow by chance. You can accept whatever comes along, or you can shape the future that you want. The question for you in the city of Charleston is not whether you're going to grow and change, but how. You know, Abraham Lincoln, I think he summed it up pretty well when he said the best way to predict the future is to create it yourself. So growth is about choices. I mean, should we be investing, in downtown or out on the highway? And I don't think the happy face makes the one on the right better. But, that's one of our choices. Should we be spreading out or growing more compactly? Should we be developing on green fields or gray fields? Think about this question. Should the character of Charleston shape the new development, or should the new development shape the character of Charleston? And how you answer that question in many ways will determine what kind of city you have 20 years from now. And so, growth is also about our children. It's about our grandchildren. It's about the future, and it's about preparing for the future. It's also about balance and harmony. It's about that relationship between conservation and economic development, jobs and the environment, old and the new, people and the land. It's about trying to find that balance. It's also, I believe, about trying to find win-win solutions to the problems that face us in America today. I'm one of these people who think we spend way too much time in America fighting about what we disagree about, and not nearly enough time sitting down community by community to talk about what we do agree about. And I want to tell you something. You can reach consensus about place in America because I believe, in my experience, most people care more about the place they live than the political party they belong to. So you actually can reach consensus about place, but you need an organization like this to help you do that, to create a forum for dialogue about the future. So you say, well, what is changing? And the answer is, of course, everything is changing. The economy is changing. Technology is changing, demographics, consumer attitudes, healthcare, travel and tourism, energy sources. The weather is changing. You know, it's interesting. So out in front of my house in Tacoma Park, Maryland, where I live, the street has been dug up for about 2 months now. What's going on in my street? Well, Pepco, who's our utility company in the Washington area, is undergrounding all the major transmission lines in the Washington region. They set aside $1 billion to start doing that. Well, they used to tell us they couldn't afford to underground utility wires. Now they're saying they can't afford not to because the extreme weather events are coming more frequently. The power's been staying out longer. The economic losses have been growing. You know, just one example of the way the world is changing. You know, how about our economy? Yes, I grew up in Birmingham. What was our biggest employer? It was U.S. Steel. It's gone now. What's our biggest employer? The University of Alabama at Birmingham, the 17 hospitals that make up the University of Alabama Medical Center. Second only to Houston now in terms of education and medicine. Totally different kind of economy. It's going on everywhere. Today we're in a global competition to attract and retain talented young people. You know, people can decide. We live in a world where capital is footloose. People can run a business anywhere, live anywhere. When I got out of college, we had these recruiters would come and they'd interview you, and you just, you know, you moved wherever you got a job. Today, most young people figure out where they want to live. They move to that city and then they look for a job. Let's think about economic development. So when I was growing up in Alabama, it was all about cheap land and cheap labor and cheap gas and low-cost positioning. Quality of life really didn't matter. And you know, the state thought that the economic development rural economic development program, let's just widen all the highways. And then they widen the highways with a bunch of junk, and we call that economic development. But I want to tell you, the economic development has completely changed. It is no longer about shotgun recruitment. It's about laser recruitment. It's not about cheap labor. It's about highly trained talent. It's not about what you don't have. It's about what you do have. And I want to tell you that quality of life is critically important in the world we live in today. And I want to suggest to you that the most important infrastructure investment for any community today, it is not roads. It is education. Education. So let's think about the choices we have in economic development. So, you know, should we be, trying to go out and constantly recruiting new business, or should we be thinking about what we already have and how we might grow some of those businesses? And for years we had, it was always about the one big thing. So in many cities we had an arms race, for example, to build the biggest convention center, which of course most cities will never win. And then it was festival marketplaces, which worked fine in Baltimore and Boston and a few other cities. But there were 19 other cities that built festival marketplaces that went bankrupt within 5 years. Places like Norfolk or Toledo or Richmond or Jacksonville. There was always, well, they did it, so it must work here. And then it was aquariums, and I know you have a great aquarium here, but cities thought, every city thought, well, if I just had an aquarium, I could turn my city around. So even Camden, New Jersey, said if they could just build an aquarium featuring the fish of New Jersey, that they could save Camden. Well, they did build that aquarium, and it's a very nice aquarium, but did it save Camden? No, it did not. Because, ladies and gentlemen, successful economic development in America today is rarely about the one big thing. We have 241 cities competing for Amazon. Only one city is going to get it. Now, I want to suggest to you, this is what we talk about at the National Main Street Center, that small steps and small businesses and small deals and small developments can actually add up to very big impact. And it's ironic that, the vast number of new jobs in America are being created in small business, but we give all our economic incentives and our subsidies to big business. So think about this, okay? So we have a couple of choices, So we could keep providing, the biggest offer to Amazon is give them $8.5 billion. $8.5 billion. And we do that with lots of big companies, okay? Which is basically transferring our wealth from our taxpayers to our big corporations, and it's moving economic activity around. And then when the subsidies run out, then the companies either leave or they threaten to leave. And think about another thing you could do. Maybe you could start investing in creating a great place and a skilled workforce. That's like, creating something that will be there long after you and I are gone. Creating a durable, diverse, local economy. And it's really about investing in yourself. And I'm not saying you don't need big business, of course we do, but I'm just suggesting that there's some things that lots of the smaller communities, and I'm interested in small communities because you know 2/3 of all American small towns are losing population. 2/3 of all of them. That's part of why we got a lot of angry people in America. And they're like, well, how do we help those people? And this is partly how we do it, by thinking about growing what we already have. So I want to suggest to you there are 4 economic essentials today. One is obviously talent. I already touched on that. The second is innovation, the ability to generate new ideas and turn them into commercial realities. Things like patents and venture capital and co-working facilities. Connectivity, creating places where people and ideas can easily connect, like the College of Charleston, like a downtown, like a co-working facility. But the thing that people always forget about is the thing on the end of the list, distinctiveness, the character of a place. The character of a place. You know, successful communities, I believe, are distinctive communities. You know, people kind of chuckle when they see that slogan, keep Austin weird. But you know, they don't think it's just a funny slogan. They think it's an economic development imperative. What they mean by that is keep us unique, keep us special, keep us on the cutting edge. Would you rather go to a community that's special, unique, or one that's just ordinary and common? You know, there's a new publication put out by the World Bank on the economics of uniqueness. And basically, they go on for a couple hundred pages and talk about all the reasons why in the world today, sameness is a minus. It is not a plus. And if you can't differentiate your project or your community or your city from any place else, you simply will have no competitive advantage in a world where capital is footloose. You know, Joe Courtwright summed it up pretty well. I ran this group called CEOs for Cities. It says unique characteristics of a place may be the only truly defensible source of competitive advantage in the world that we live in today. Mark Twain put it this way. He said, we take stock of a city like we take stock of a man. The clothes or appearance are the externals by which we judge. So let's look at an example. Let's take a community's front door, its gateway. And just like with meeting a person, a good first impression is important, and a bad first impression is hard to change. You think you'd rather visit the town of Franklin, Tennessee, or Midfield, Alabama? Which one looks more like a community with a sense of pride and a sense of place? Which one looks more like a community that you would rather invest time or money in? If you don't remember anything else I say tonight, remember this. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that every single day in America, people make decisions about where to live, where to invest, where to vacation, where to retire, based on what our communities look like. What they look like. So, this is the official travel guide for the state of Oregon. Check out their slogan, Oregon, things look different here. Can you imagine a state travel brochure that said something like, South Carolina, things look the same here? Well, of course not, because who'd want to come? You know, the truth is, the more any town in South Carolina comes to look just like every place else, the less reason there is to visit. On the other hand, the more a community does to enhance its distinctiveness, whether that's artistic or historical or architectural or whatever, the more people want to visit, and that's exactly what tourism is. If every place was just like every place else, there would be simply no reason to travel any place. But it goes well beyond tourism as well. If you think about the economy today, it's not so much about markets anymore, it's about places. And you know, it's sort of, I don't care who you talk to, they're all saying the same thing. This is a economic development firm in Pittsburgh. They say new investments increasingly seeking locations based on the quality of place rather than the utility of location. Even the home builders put it this way. They say the place is becoming more important than the product. What does the National Association of Home Builders mean when they say that? What they mean is what is going on outside of a house has far more impact on the value of that dwelling than what's going on inside of the house. You know, let me tell you something. Granite countertops won't affect your value nearly as much as the neighborhood that you live in. It's called location. Location, location, as the realtors would like to say. And I think Mick Cornett sums it up pretty well when he said that economic development today is really the result of creating places where people want to be. And you know, it's interesting. So, I have this foundation down in Miami, the Knight Foundation. money came from the Knight Ridder newspaper chain when it was sold, and they did one of the largest public opinion polls in American history. 43,000 Americans were surveyed. And what they found was very interesting. They found that cities with the greatest attachment to place also had the strongest economies, greatest attachment to place. So they said, well, what is it that attaches people to place? And first it was like social offerings, like places to get together with your neighbors, meet and mingle, like maybe a coffee shop, maybe a library, maybe a park. Openness. How welcoming a community was to newcomers. Now, I travel a lot, and I was in a city I won't tell you the name of a couple of years ago, and somebody said to me, you know, we're very welcoming to people who aren't different. I want to suggest to you that the successful communities of tomorrow will be the places that are welcoming to everyone, not just to people who aren't different. And then the last thing on the list, interesting, was aesthetics. Physical beauty and green space. You live in one of the most beautiful cities on the planet. That has value. This has incredible value. You know, I have a friend, Doug Kilbaugh, who used to run the School of Architecture at the University of Michigan. He sums it up pretty well. He says, if a building, a landscape, or a city is not beautiful, it will not be loved. If it is not loved, it won't be maintained and improved. In short, it won't be sustained. So I work in sustainable development. People think it's always about technology, you know, energy efficient buildings and driverless cars and, you know, energy grids, things like that. They know there's a lot about that, but if you actually look up the definition of the word sustainable in the dictionary, it will tell you it means enduring. Enduring. Ladies and gentlemen, sustainable community is a place of enduring value. Of enduring value. So I want to suggest to you there are what I think of as a couple of dimensions of uniqueness, things that can set you apart. Now you're already doing most of these things, but I want to maybe suggest you can think about some of these things in some new ways. Let's talk about anchor institutions. You know, like the College of Charleston, like hospitals. Did you know that in 65 of the 100 biggest cities in America today, the largest employer is a hospital or a university? Yes. You know, but some of those universities, you know, work very closely with their communities, and some of them don't or didn't. So who are the biggest recipients of federal research dollars in the United States? Well, I'll tell you, number one is Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Number two is Stanford. You know, Stanford figured out how to commercialize that research, and they created what we now know, of course, as the Silicon Valley. And Hopkins didn't care anything about what was going on in Baltimore until they realized they couldn't attract the best and brightest to go to work there anymore because the neighborhoods around them were become war zones. They turned their back on the city of Baltimore. Now they finally realized that the success of Baltimore is tied to the success of the largest employer in the state of Maryland. They've now invested almost $1 billion in their neighborhood to try to help turn around that city. That's what I mean about having a relationship. So, you know, these anchor institutions are pretty important. How about downtowns? They play a decisive role in any community. Even if you don't live in downtown, even if you don't shop in downtown, etc., etc. They are critical as a nerve center and as a, you know, connecting point. They're a key asset in regional prosperity. You know, check this headline out, this Southern Business Development. Site searching the South to make sure you inspect the communities downtown first. And these are basically industrial park developers. They're not going to put their industrial park in downtown, so why do they care? Well, of course, they've figured out that if you don't have a healthy downtown, you simply don't have a healthy city or town. You know, the apple rots from the inside out, and you know, one of the things we've all learned in the world of community planning is that, you know, it's hard to be a suburb of nothing. So actually investing in the downtown is actually about investing in your entire community. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't be investing on the other side, outside the peninsula. Of course you should. In fact, those are some of your greatest opportunities. I'll come back and talk about that some more. But you know, I'm proud to say and happy to say that we are actually moving back downtown again all over the country. This is a new study by Cushman Wakefield found that 500 major American companies have basically moved back downtown or opened new offices or expanded in downtowns in the past 5 years. Companies like Marriott and Motorola and McDonald's or Walgreens or, you know, Quicken Loans or Caterpillar or GE. I could just go on and on. They say, well, why do you move? We did a survey. Here's what they said. First, to attract and retain talented workers. Second, to build brand identity and corporate culture. Three, to support creative collaboration. So this is the, you know, Amazon headquarters one. They used to be all over the suburbs of Seattle. Then they decided to move into downtown. It used to be the only way you could get to work at Amazon was drive your car. Now you can still drive your car, but you could also take a train, or you could take a bus, or you could take a boat, or you could ride your bike, or you could walk, and at the end of the day, you're right in the middle of everything. And, you know, it turns out a lot of those people that work there kind of like that idea. But, you know, we're thinking about, you know, how we use our assets to grow ourselves back into, you know, real life. So this is, you know, Durham, you know, tobacco warehouses, empty tobacco warehouses, and, you know, they've recycled all those warehouses and turned them into one of the great downtowns now. You know, nobody used to go to downtown Durham. Now it's really become quite a remarkable place. So here's where I live. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, the biggest county in Maryland, right outside of D.C. And, you know, our county seat was Rockville, and we thought it was a great idea in 1970, basically to tear down almost our entire downtown of our county seat, Rockville. And what did we do? We replaced it with this, the Rockville Mall. But guess what? Now we tore the mall down and put the downtown back. And it's sort of a metaphor for America. You know, we're actually doing this all over the country. And, you know, we were like, what were we thinking when we did that? So many things that, you know, happened in this state as well. People think, like, what were we thinking when we did that? You know, let's talk about parks and green space. This is our newest report, The Case for Open Space, Why Real Estate Industry Should Invest in Parks and Green Space. That's just, you know, we just summarized some of the dozens of studies that show that parks and green space increases the value of adjacent property. So, example, where's the most valuable land in New York? Well, there it is. It's the land next to Central Park. But, you know, parks are a key element in community revitalization all over the country, and so I spent a lot of time working with people who are working on parks. And here's a great example. This is in downtown Fort Worth. They took these two parking lots and they turned them into Sundance Square, which was, of course, the key catalyst in the revitalization of downtown. Or how about this one in Cincinnati, where they took this parking lot and turned it into this great park called Washington Park in a fantastic neighborhood called Over the Rhine, which is probably one of the best turnaround stories in America. And you know, as we grow, we need to green at the same time. If we're going to densify our communities, we need to green them at the same time. Density demands compensating amenity. You know, and what are those amenities? Parks, green space, trails, you know, sidewalks, all those kinds of things. You say, well, where do you find green space in an already developed area? Well, we got all this old infrastructure, places like abandoned railroad lines and utility corridors and highways. And, you know, we are doing so many new parks on these kind of neglected, forgotten landscapes all over the country. Let's talk about preservation, something that I think brought most of you here tonight. And I always try to remind people why preservation is so important. You know, and I think sometimes we forget why at its core it's so important. I know many of you have read some of Thomas Wolfe's famous novels. You know, he penned the immortal line, "You can't go home again." Well, sadly, Tom Wolfe can't go home again to his original house. Here it is. It's in this parking lot. Why is historic preservation important? I would suggest to you first and foremost because these are the places that physically connect us to the past. These are the places that tell us who we are and where we came from. You know, ladies and gentlemen, a city without a past is like a man without a memory. You know, as Daniel Webster once wrote, he said, quote, "The man who feels no sentiment or veneration for the memory of his forefathers is himself unworthy of kindred regard and remembrance." Saving the historic buildings of South Carolina is about saving the heart and soul of South Carolina. But it's also incredibly important to your economic well-being as well. Let me show you a few examples. So this is one of the first 4 Main Street towns in America, Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin. And that used to be their fire station. And the guy bought it and turned it into a pizza parlor. And like so many small towns, that was a town going downhill. And they started working with the owners of downtown buildings to restore their facades. It tells a story about the history of the building, but guess what else happened? Well, sales of pizza almost doubled. And to sustain that over a multi-year period. You know, one of the things I'm proud to say is that Main Street is that, you know, we have leveraged billions of dollars in private investment by a very small investment in public investment. We've created hundreds of thousands of new businesses and new jobs and restored buildings all over the country. Relatively, you know, and we didn't get $8.5 billion to do that. For every $1 of public money, we leveraged $30 of private money. And when you think about preservation, think about all the ways that preservation is good for the economy: jobs, property values, tourism, downtown revitalization, affordability, housing, environmental impacts. So we do a report at ULI every year called Emerging Trends in Real Estate. And we interview thousands of developers and bankers and finance people all over the country, including lots of people here in South Carolina. And we ask them about what the trends are. In 2016, we found a very interesting thing. We found that, quote, office space in rehabilitated industrial buildings is now demanding rents above new Class A product. Above. So here's a typical Class A office building, right? You've seen these all over the country, right? But I want to tell you something. Buildings like this are commanding higher rents, faster lease-up, less turnover. Why? Because all the creative class employers said, and the employees said they like space with character. And by the way, these big floor plate buildings, you can move things around really easy. They're very flexible. So, which is also something people need in sort of the new world economy. So this is going on everywhere. So this is an abandoned wharf in Boston. It's now the world headquarters for the Converse Shoe Company. Or how about this abandoned Sears distribution center in Seattle? It's now the headquarters for the Starbucks Corporation. Or how about this vacant post office in downtown Chicago? Guess what? Walgreens is moving in from the suburbs and putting their headquarters, their world headquarters, right in that old post office. Or how about the former Tide detergent plant in Baltimore, which is the headquarters for the Under Armour Corporation? Or how about this abandoned power plant? We have places like this all over the country, which is now the headquarters for a company called ProMedica. And what about the largest abandoned train station in America, in Detroit? A symbol of the turnaround in that city. It's now becoming the global center of the Ford Technology Center. You know, Ford is no longer an auto company, they're a mobility company. And this is where all of their research is going to take place, in this white elephant building nobody thought could be saved. But we're actually saving buildings like that all over the place. And I want to suggest to you that all over this state there are buildings that have incredible potential if we just looked at them in a new way. And one of the great things, of course, about Charleston is that it's a walkable place. And one of the things we learned is, we had an oversupply of large lot single-family housing everywhere in America, and an undersupply of everything else, which is one of the reasons why walkable communities are so valuable today. And we're getting, premiums in walkable communities far above, other communities. To give you an example, we got two suburbs of D.C. One's called Reston, one's called Sterling. They're about 20 miles out of the city. Reston, which is a walkable mixed-use transit-served suburb, is getting premiums of 25 to 100% more than Sterling, Virginia. Same distance out. The difference is, of course, Sterling's a drive everywhere for everything suburb. The suburbs are changing, and the successful suburbs of the future are going to be the ones that have some walkable place in them, like a mixed-use downtown. Now, I understand affordable housing is kind of a problem here in Charleston, like it is in every hot market city. And if your only solution is suggesting people that they move to some Midwest state, which one would they like to go to, you won't get very far. But, there is no silver bullet to a affordable housing project. We've learned that all over the country. It's a big issue for us. And, one of the things I want to suggest to you is that did you know that we're losing 2 times as many affordable houses every year, affordable houses, as we build everywhere? So you really can't build your way out of the problem. I'll show you some examples in a minute. Most states now are hot market cities are actually putting public money into affordable housing. And I know I'm not going to mention the affordable housing, mandate. I'll keep my mouth shut, they can't do that here. But, what about public land? I'm going to show you some examples of that. Did you know that all of our new fire stations and all of our new libraries in D.C. have housing on top of them? Did you know that what's the most, who pays the highest salaries for new teachers in America? San Mateo County, California. Right out of college, you can get $75,000 a year. But did you know that they have some of the highest turnover for teachers in America? Because nobody making $75,000 a year can afford to live anywhere near San Mateo County. So they were all living in the East Bay, and they were driving, an hour each way to school. And being a teacher's hard work, right? So what do? They decided to build housing for teachers on school board land. And that's one of the ways we make housing more affordable. There's lots of other things, in redeveloping aging commercial forests, etc. So, when you think about affordable housing, you got to think about preservation. It's about identifying and preserving existing units. And whether it's a school or a factory or a hospital or a department store, there's incredible opportunities all over the country. In Vermont, they have something called the Vermont Affordable Housing and Conservation Trust Fund. And virtually all of their affordable housing is in restored historic buildings, and almost all of it's in the center of villages, walkable villages, because particularly, think about seniors. They like to live in places they can get around without a car, for example. And this is one of our new fire stations in D.C. Check out the housing on the top of the fire station. That's also what we're doing with our libraries. And by the way, we do this at our transit stations. This is happening all over the country now. So you might start thinking about what kind of, federal land, state land, county land, city land, school board land. Those are opportunities to put some affordable units on those because you already own the land. And, land costs are one of the biggest parts of, why housing is so expensive. So let's talk about tourism for a second. Of course, you're one of the great tourist destinations in America, like all these other places. What's so interesting is we kind of forgot for years how important preservation was. So I worked in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and we helped put together the redevelopment plan for the city. And they didn't want just a physical redevelopment plan, they wanted an economic redevelopment plan. So all of the consultants, we said to the state, well, what's your biggest industry? Is it the sugar industry, the oil industry, the chemical industry, seafood industry? No. The biggest industry in Louisiana, number one, is the tourism industry. That's number one. And you know what the engine of that industry is? Well, it's the French Quarter, right? But did you know that for about 40 years, the Louisiana Department of Transportation wanted to put a freeway through the French Quarter? They didn't actually understand that is more important and more valuable than any plant, factory, or distribution center in the entire state of Louisiana. And of course, that's, I can say that about the San Antonio Riverwalk, which they were going to put underground, or the, Seattle Pike Place Market, which they were going to tear down because they said, oh, we need more downtown parking. Like, parking for what? If all the parking in the world has nothing to do, who's going to want to go there? So, tourism. I think Arthur Fromer summed it up pretty well. He said, among cities and towns with no particular recreational appeal, those that preserve their past continue to enjoy tourism. Tourists simply won't go to a city or town that's lost its soul. The saving the soul of the place actually is pretty good. But I want to tell you that there's an upside to tourism and a downside to tourism. And I'm sure you recognize this. And so we're going to talk for a few minutes about how do you maximize the benefits of tourism while minimizing the burdens of tourism. Tourism is a double-edged sword. Yes, it does lots of good things. Jobs, tax base, infrastructure, facilities, selling local price, like in your shop, just as an example. But also, you can have a lot of downsides, like congestion, crowds, and crime, haphazard development, cost of living increases, etc. So, you got to manage tourism. This is what the head of the tourism division at the American Planning Association says: the impacts of tourism on the community can be beneficial if planned and managed, or extremely damaging if left without controls. We just had a big conference in D.C. about 2 weeks ago called Over-Tourism. How tourism is ruining 30 of the greatest places on the planet Earth. It doesn't have to. So we're going to talk about, for a few minutes, some ideas on how you can keep from harming that goose that lays the golden egg. First, it's understanding the difference between mass market tourism and sustainable tourism. So what is that difference? Well, mass market tourism is all about heads and beds. It's about quantity. It's also about things that are artificial, homogenized, generic, and formulaic. On the other hand, sustainable tourism is about quality. Quality. Things in places that are authentic, specialized, unique, and homegrown. So this is, these are all examples of, mass market tourism, mega hotels, theme parks. We're carrying as many as 6,000 people now on some of the cruise ships. So imagine if you're in a little town like in St. Thomas, 5 of these ships pulling at the same time. They have, 3 times as many people as live on the entire island. And by the way, all their money is being spent on the cruise ship line. They're not spending very little in that community. So the community gets all the downside and none of the upside. And by the way, did you know that if you spend $1 in a local store, it will recirculate through your community 3 times more than if you spend $1 in a chain store? Because the locally owned store has a local attorney, and the local accountant, and a local, PR firm or whatever. So sustainable tourism, distinctive destinations, historic buildings, unspoiled scenery, locally owned buildings. Mass market tourism is about high volume, high impact, and low yield. Sustainable tourism is about low volume, low impact, high yield. And, understanding this, you got to recognize that all tourists are not created equal. So, when I was in college, the spring break capital of America was Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And they wanted to be the spring break capital of America. They thought it was a great idea to, invite a couple of million college kids to come down here every spring. But of course, what they weren't counting on is they were going to sleep 6 to 8 to a room. The only thing they spent money on was beer. They had to hire all kinds of extra police and cleanup crews. And then nobody else would come because they got an image as an out-of-control, drunken college kid kind of town. Well, guess what? They don't have as many tourists anymore. They're no longer the spring break capital of America. Now it's Panama City, at least until the hurricane, and Cancun. But the tourists that come now sleep 2 to a room. They eat in fancy restaurants and buy things in nice stores, and they don't have to hire extra police or extra cleanup crews, etc., etc. They made a conscious decision to embrace sustainable tourism, not mass market tourism. Let's talk about, tourism is the sum total of the travel experience. It's not just what happens, at a house tour here in Charleston. It's about everything you see and do from the time you leave home to get where you're going and go back again. It's about the hotels you sleep in and the restaurants that you eat in. And, we sort of think that hotels ought to fit in architecturally and environmentally. Here's an ad I pulled out of an airline magazine. I think it said the chain of hotels should reflect a city and not each other, although they used to always reflect each other. It's interesting, Marriott did this study and found that it turns out millennials said that authenticity and interesting were more important than comfortable and predictable in the lodging world. You've heard that old slogan about Holiday Inn. The best thing about Holiday Inn was no surprises. What the worst thing about Holiday Inn is? No surprises. So this is, why we've had growth in heritage tourism and things like Airbnb, which I'm going to come back and talk to about in a minute, etc. And also, it turns out young people in particular say they like to stay downtown. Now, we used to always have downtown hotels in every small town in South Carolina, but then we just stopped and put them all on the highway. So I was in Richmond, Indiana, speaking to Preservation, Indiana about a year ago, and they put me up in this Hampton Inn out on the highway because they didn't have a downtown hotel. The only thing I could walk to was the Jiffy Lube. I'm saying to them, well, maybe you guys might want to have a downtown hotel, which actually we're doing that again. So here's a new downtown hotel in Lexington called the Call Alto Inn. Since they saved an old manor house, and that's where you check in and where you have your breakfast. So we're starting to do that all over the country. And finally, we're actually restoring historic buildings for hotels everywhere. So this is the Pabst Brewery, which is now Brew House Inn and Suites. Or did you know that H.H. Richardson's largest building, the State Mental Hospital of New York, is now the Henry Hotel? Or the jail in San Antonio is now a Holiday Inn, or the John Deere factory in Waterloo is now a Marriott. I love this company, Minimums. They have 26 hotels all in the Northwest, and all of them are in restored historic buildings like this elementary school in Portland. Short-term rentals, I know you talked about this, and congratulations on having one of the best things. Ben Franklin used to say everything in moderation. And when Airbnb was first invented, it was, this idea of you got an extra bedroom in your house and you could, rent that out to somebody. Great idea. And there are people like me, empty nesters. I got lots of empty bedrooms in my house. But my kids have all gone now, etc. And so, that made a lot of sense. But then people started doing things like building 20-story buildings in New York, saying they were an apartment building, and then leasing out every single unit as a short-term rental. Basically, building a hotel without any zoning approval. Or like coming into a city like Savannah or Charleston and buying up 5 houses on a block. And so we're seeing this all over the country where taking so many units off of the market, particularly by big developers, is reducing our supply of affordable housing. It's driving up the prices for everyone. And so this is a hot issue all over the country, and communities are starting to think about, well, at least we ought to license these things, and we ought to get the tax revenue off them, and we might actually want to limit them. So some cities now are limiting Airbnbs to the owner-occupied buildings or owner-occupied +1. You know, they're not allowing people to build, you know, apartment buildings and turn the whole thing into a hotel in New York anymore. This is not just an issue here in the U.S., it's an issue all over the world. Another thing you might want to think about is how to get tourists out of their cars. So congestion, that's a big issue everywhere. Yeah, you know, but obviously, you know, you could actually accommodate more tourists, you just can't accommodate more of their cars. Right? And by the way, walking is the most popular form of recreation in America by far. And what's the fastest growing form of transportation? Bicycling is the fastest growing form of transportation. And I can tell you that there is nobody in the urban planning world who hasn't figured out that if we design cities around cars, you're going to get more cars. But if you design cities around people, you're going to get more people in better places. So one of the things you need to think about is how to get people out of their cars. And we are undergoing a transportation revolution in America. Did you know that young people are buying a lot less cars and they're driving less? And, you know, look at this. In 1985, 90% of 19-year-olds had a driver's license. By 2016, it was 67%. Did you know a quarter of all young people don't even know how to drive? You know, and then we have things like like Uber and Lyft and car share and bike share. Autonomous vehicles are coming, you know, and they're all going to impact our, you know, transportation world. I think, you know, George Will kind of sums it up pretty well. He says, like the smartphone, which you lived without until about a decade ago, now we can't imagine living without. Future mobility innovations will quickly change from unanticipated to indispensable. You know, Google does a millennial survey every year. And, you know, last year they asked young people, what's the one thing you couldn't live without? Almost 70% said their cell phone. Only 20-something% said a car. That just gives you some idea of how the world has changed. I'm a big advocate for bicycling infrastructure. For one reason, it gives you more bang for your buck. It's relatively inexpensive, and it's a way to get more bang for your buck. So I have a brother-in-law that lives on the Outer Banks that built a bike trail that parallels the beach road, right? And it turns out people extend their vacations one full day because they now, you know, they can get around on a bicycle. Or if you go to Hilton Head, where, you know, Charles Fraser is known for developing Hilton Head, he always said more people came to ride bikes than to play golf. Certainly true today. And this is, you know, we looked at this around the country. Do you know that bike infrastructure costs about 1/20th of what auto infrastructure does for the exact same amount of distance? So, you know, here's a mile of protected bikeway. It's expensive, $400,000 in downtown San Francisco, but a mile of new street, in city street, $570 million. A new mile of East Bay Bridge, $2 billion. You know, we all, you know, we want the best of everything in America. We're just not willing to pay for anything. You know, and our gas tax revenue is going down because cars are more fuel efficient. So you want more bang for your transportation buck, start investing in, you know, human-powered infrastructure. Now I want to say a word about parking. You know, parking's real expensive. Surface parking, $3,000 to $4,000 a space. Structured parking, $15,000 to $20,000 a space. Underground parking, $50,000 a space. So suppose instead of building 2 structured parking spaces, you said that as your developer, well, I'll have a car share facility here, and I'll have a bike share facility, and, you know, maybe you might want to be on like a bus route, for example, and there's a lot of young people who actually love that idea, but they don't want to pay for that parking space that they're not using anymore. By the way, you can park 12 bicycles in the space of 1 car. So I'm not saying, you know, but you're all worried about congestion and try to figure out ways to get people out of their cars. And it's probably pretty easy to do in a place like this. How about educating visitors? You know, tell them what your expectations are. In fact, if the more people know about a place, the more they'll take care of the place. You know, we learned this in the conservation world, that when people know why a place is worth preserving, they value it more. And by the way, we educate in order to reduce the need to regulate. And you might talk about some of the expectations of tourists. So you know with D.C., I don't know if you know this, if you come to D.C. and you get on the metro, the tourists always were standing on the left when people were trying to get to work, and the commuters are like yelling at them. So now they can pass out little flyers that say, you know, stand to the right on the escalators. You know, just showing people what the norms of the community are. Tell your story. So I grew up in Birmingham, right? You know, the story of a place is incredibly valuable to a place. You know, and our story is painful and disturbing, But you know, we got one of the great civil rights museums in the world in Birmingham, and you go there, you'll hear people speaking German and French and Dutch coming up from all the world to hear our story. And by the way, we didn't tear down all the steel mills. We saved one of them, the Sloss Furnace, which is now a state park. We tell people about our industrial background. So we might want to celebrate some of the famous people, and you do this, but think about more contemporary people, or celebrate some of the famous events like the Great Depression or the lunch counter sit-ins in Greensboro. You might say, well, we don't have any famous people in my town. Well, maybe celebrate ordinary people. You know, like watermen or ranchers or coal miners or commuters. Tell your story. This is the Chisholm Trail mural in downtown Fort Worth. Tells us a story about the role the cattle drives played in the founding of Fort Worth. Or this is my little town, Tacoma Park, Maryland. That's our family album. Every one of those pictures is important to the history of our town. Or this is in Nashua, New Hampshire. They used to have a real diner called the Yankee Flyer Diner, and it burned down, and they wanted to bring it back to life, and they did it in that mural. And guess how they paid for it? All the people in the mural are real people who live in Nashville today. They all paid to have their pictures put in the mural. Where there's a will, there's a way. How about the Louisville Slugger Baseball Museum in downtown Louisville? It's appropriate to have the biggest bat because that's where they make the bats we're using in the major leagues. Or remember those old postcards? Want to see what old Florida looks like? Well, you can see it in downtown Orlando in this big postcard. And you know, we always used to integrate art and infrastructure, and then we kind of forgot about that. We're actually starting to do it again. There's the new Frog Bridge across the Connecticut River, Hanover, New Hampshire, just opened a couple of years ago. You know, this is in Spokane, Washington, where they manufacture radio flyer wagons. So it's a piece of playground equipment, a piece of public art, and something that tells you about the history of the community. You know, or how about, did you know that all the street lights in Hershey, Pennsylvania are Hershey? You know, and I know every town in South Carolina's got some blank wall like that. You say, well, what can you do with that? Well, you can do something like this. This is in downtown Columbia, South Carolina. They finally had to put a sign up there because people were trying to drive in. A Trump, Floyd, full-guy mural. So tourism must be managed. How many tourists are too many tourists? How many tour buses are too many tour buses? How many hotels are too many hotels? You know, if you don't ask those questions, you can run the risk of destroying the very thing that people come to see. And you'll create a sense of backlash and resentment about tourism in a place. Look at this, tourists don't park here. You know, and so this is a worldwide issue, you know, and just I've showed you some examples. Venice has now banned large cruise ships. They've actually said no more hotels in Venice. The Roadhead is actually putting a daily limit on people who go inside the historic city. Amsterdam is encouraging tourists to get out of the center city and go to other places. There's a lot to see in greater Amsterdam, but everybody's hanging out, you know, in a few neighborhoods. So they're trying to get people to go to some of those neighborhoods and, you know, advertising lesser destinations. Here's one of my favorite places that's thought about this. This is the first community in America that created a comprehensive plan based on carrying capacity. Carrying capacity. They said, well, how many people can we safely evacuate in case of a hurricane? How do we protect our water or wildlife? Or, you know, the Dean Darling National Wildlife Refuge. You know, they said, you know, we can't just have unlimited development here and still protect what we love about the place. All right, I want to end by saying a few words about retail and how the world is changing in retail. So you've all seen this, you know, strip mall coming soon. But I want to tell you something. That is retail for the last century. The future belongs to town centers and main streets and mixed-use development. And there's lots of reasons for that. First of all, because consumer attitudes are changing, and we now got something called the internet, and internet shopping, and all our stores are, you know, bricks and mortar stores are getting smaller, particularly our big box stores. Retail is rediscovering our cities and towns. We have, you know, for 40 years, the only retail we built was out on the highway somewhere. So there's only one place left with more spending power than stores, and that was in our downtowns and in our cities. And look at this article from USA Today. Malls are like totally uncool, say it to you. You know that we've closed 300 malls since the Depression? I mean, since the recession. We've opened one in Las Vegas. That's the only one we've opened. We're going to close another 300 malls. You want to find out what's going on in South Carolina? Go to the website called deadmalls.com. Click on the state of South Carolina. I'll tell you what's going on with every mall in the state. You know, one of the greatest trends in the next 25 years is going to be the redevelopment of a lot of these strip malls. You know, Joni Mitchell used to say paved Paradise and put in, a parking lot. Well, now we can tear up those parking lots and we can put Paradise back. And the reason is we already got infrastructure in place. We already got sewer and water there. We already got a road out in front. It's underperforming economically. And this is what's going on all over the country, ladies and gentlemen. This is what you ought to be thinking about out of the peninsula. So there's your typical Best Buy, spread out, single-use drive only. Here's another Best Buy right on the same spot. Okay, well, yeah, you can drive there still, but you can sleep upstairs and shop downstairs. And who might want to do that? Well, some of the 75% of American households who have no school-age children. What's the fastest growing form of household in America? A single person living alone. That's 26% of all households. And they don't want a big, 5-bedroom house in the suburbs and a big yard. They actually kind of like this idea. And now the retailers have changed all their old rules, all the things they used to say they could never do, like a mixed-use project, or a small footprint, or a multi-story building, or a grocery store. That's a giant grocery store on the right in the old O Street Market in D.C. And you've all seen this. We were interviewing the head of real estate for Walmart, and they said, we've reached a stage where we can be flexible. We no longer have to build a great blue battleship box. Let me show you our first Walmart in D.C. Well, there it is. It's in a 5-story building, a brand new building. It has 200 apartments above the Walmart. It has a swimming pool on the roof. There are actually real windows that rip real sunlight onto the floor of the Walmart. You say, well, where's the parking? The parking's underneath the building. And by the way, you don't need as much parking in a city. Because the average millennial male goes to the grocery store 3 times a week. They just buy what they're going to eat for dinner that night. So here's our second Walmart. This is in Fort Totten, across the street from a metro stop. But this is going on all over the country. That's a Target. That's a Target in Connecticut. Here's a new Target in Chapel Hill. Target's even buying up all the abandoned department stores and restoring them, like the Carson Curry Scott building in Chicago. And by the way, what's a big box retailer anyway? It's what we used to call a department store. And so, I was in New York and I saw this Home Depot and somebody said to me, well, how do you get your lumber home? And the answer is, they deliver. Well, what a concept. So I want to end by just sharing with you what I call my secrets of successful communities. As I said, I've been in this business for 40 years. I've come to some conclusions about why some cities are succeeding and others are not. First and foremost, it always begins with a vision for the future. Now, some people might call that a plan for the future. And I know that in the South, planning can be a dirty word sometimes. But I always ask people who tell me they're against planning, I always say to them, well, then you tell me the name of any successful organization, institution, corporation, or community that doesn't plan for the future. Failing to plan simply means planning to fail. As the book of Proverbs says, without vision, the people will perish. Try to imagine a successful corporation that didn't have a business plan. Well, they couldn't get any investors. They couldn't compete in the marketplace. And successful plans always begin by inventorying your assets. And then successful communities build their plans, whether it's a tourism plan, an economic development plan, a land use plan, whatever, around the enhancement of what they've already got. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't say I'm against regulation. It prevents bad things from happening, sets a minimum standard of conduct, protects our environment, and so forth. But you need to use carrots, not just sticks. And there's lots of incentives that we can use. But, here in the South, for many years, our biggest impediment to better development, you know what it was? It was a fear of saying no to anything. Well, communities who were afraid to say no to anything got the worst of everything. Communities that set no standards or low standards simply compete to the bottom. But what we've learned is that if you say no to bad development, you can always get better development in its place. Successful communities cooperate with their neighbors for mutual benefit, the city, the county, public land managers, national parks, etc. Successful communities consider what they look like as well as ecology and economics. Successful communities have strong leaders and committed citizens. And it doesn't take a lot of people to really change a place for the better. And I think that's what you have a legacy of doing, is changing this place for the better and standing up for what you know is right and what is better and trying to set some standards that you compete to the top rather than the bottom. And I know it is not always easy getting things done in the land use world here in the South. Welcome to Buena Vista, Virginia, home of 6,002 happy citizens and 3 old grouches. And doesn't that sum up life in any community? And no matter what you propose to do, there are people who say you can't do it, it won't work. Try it already, it costs too much. And yes, no is a powerful word in America, but I want to tell you a more powerful word, yes. Yes, we can make Charleston a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. You know, a pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity, but an optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. Ladies and gentlemen, you can grow without destroying the things that people love. I believe that the special places of South Carolina are worth preserving, not just because they're fragile and beautiful and economically important, but because they're the knack of America. Thank you so much for having me.